change.
I thank Professor John Dugard for his statement. I now give the floor to Professor Max du Plessis. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Court, it's a privilege to appear before you on behalf of South Africa. My task is to address this Court on the new facts and the grave changes in the situation in Rafah that is fast leading to the deadliest phase in this ongoing genocide. Those are the circumstances that compel South Africa to return to the Court to seek urgent further or modified provisional measures against Israel. Judges of this Court have recognized that the underlying reason for the Court's January and March orders was that the very right of existence of the Palestinian population in Gaza is currently at risk of irreparable prejudice, and that the only effective way of preserving the right of existence of the protected group is through the function of prevention. South Africa seeks these provisional measures before it's too late for prevention to be possible, let alone effective. This Court noted that the situation in Rafah was already perilous in its decision of 16 February. And instead of complying with this Court's decisions of January, February, and March, Israel has defied this Court by trapping, besieging, and bombarding an overcrowded Rafah, exacerbating the security and the safety of 1.5 million highly vulnerable Palestinians. Mr. President, no one in Gaza is safe because, as the United Nations has repeatedly made clear, nowhere in Gaza is safe. Palestinians were instructed by Israeli evacuation orders to move south to Rafah and seek refuge there from the bombardment in the north. Yet for months, the expanding population scrambling for refuge in Rafah has been explicitly told by Israel that they are not safe, and that Israel does not intend for them to be safe. The international community has witnessed Israeli soldiers preparing for the ground invasion of Rafah, filming themselves, chanting, "Tear down Rafah." And Israel's intention is typified by statements such as that of Israel's Minister of Finance, Mr. Smotrich, a member of the Security Cabinet, who has explained, and I quote, "There are no half measures. Rafah, Deir al-Balah, Nusayrat, total annihilation. You shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. There's no place under heaven." Close quote. Mr. Nukai-Tobi will deal in careful detail with intention that is so clearly evident in such statements and by Israel's conduct. Now, Israel has resolutely resisted all international efforts to persuade and cajole it from eventually attacking Rafah. As we contemplate the horror of recent events and the significance of Rafah for Israel's ongoing assault, the reminders, regrettably, of Srebrenica come into view. Rafah's prominence in the eyes of both the Palestinians in Gaza and the international community lies in it being the most visible of the safe areas in Gaza, which has received significant attention in the international media. To paraphrase the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia in a decision endorsed by this Court, Israel's spectacular destruction of Rafah, despite the assurances of the international community, including this Court, and in the full glare of the international media, is intended by Israel to serve as a potent example to all Palestinians of their vulnerability and their defenselessness in the face of Israeli military forces, and to be emblematic of the fate of all Palestinians in Gaza. To use Mr. Smotrich's words, that there is no place under heaven that they're safe. South Africa has made clear in its request of 10 May that not only is there nowhere for the 1.5 million displaced people and others in Rafah to safely flee, so much of Gaza having been reduced to rubble, but that if Rafah is similarly destroyed, there will be little left of Gaza or prospects for the survival of Palestinian life in the territory. Rafah is where Gaza's largest, still partially functioning hospitals are situated. Attacks on Rafah's hospitals, akin to those mounted by Israel against hospitals elsewhere in the Strip, would therefore deal a fatal blow to Gaza's already crippled healthcare system. And at the same time as these assaults, aid is being throttled. That throttling is done defiantly and deliberately. This court ordered on 28 March that, in conformity with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, and in view of the worsening conditions of life faced by Palestinians in Gaza, in particular the spread of famine and starvation, that Israel was to take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay, in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. That included an express order that Israel increased the capacity and number of land crossing points and maintaining them open for as long as necessary. And Israel was also ordered to ensure, with immediate effect, that its military does not prevent through any action the delivery of urgently needed humanitarian assistance. Why was that order so critical? Well, because the 2 border crossings in Rafah, which Israel has seized and shut down, are the main entry points for life-saving humanitarian aid and other goods entering Gaza, and for the entry and exit of people, including humanitarian workers, medics, medical evacuees, and Palestinians trying to flee the conflict. Israel's seizure of those crossings places Israel in control of all access to and from Gaza. Its current closure of the crossings has served to seal Gaza hermetically from the outside world, further torpedoing the delivery of aid to and within Gaza. And as the primary humanitarian hub for assistance in Gaza, if Rafah falls, so too does Gaza. And deliberately herding 1.5 million Palestinians into Rafah and then carrying out a full-scale bombardment while sealing off entry and exit for life-saving aid to an already devastated population, while exposing them to famine and human suffering, leaves only one inference regrettably, and that is of genocidal intent. I turn now to consider the topic of Rafah as a supposed place of refuge. 10 days ago, Rafah was described as the last refuge for Palestinians in Gaza. It was the only remaining area of the Strip which had not yet been substantially destroyed by Israeli attacks. Over the past 7 months, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were ordered by Israel to evacuate to Rafah for their safety, some forcibly being displaced for the 9th time. Desperate, terrified, and clinging to life by a thread, these Palestinians have sought shelter, often in makeshift tents or under sheets of scrap plastic, in the tiny and densely crowded city of Rafah, hoping against hope to stay alive in the ongoing Israeli bombardment. A city of children, Rafah has become home to some 600,000 Palestinian children and babies, many of them orphaned or disabled by Israel. And recall that they joined the staggering reality, according to UN Women, that among the dead in Gaza are an estimated 6,000 mothers, leaving 19,000 children orphaned. In addition to being the population center, Rafah is the primary humanitarian hub of Gaza, as I've said, and the only remaining area of the beleaguered Strip with the infrastructure and the resources to host the over 1 million displaced Palestinians, albeit in a situation that has been described by the UN as a pressure cooker of despair. But Rafah, Your Excellencies, is no refuge. It's no safe place. On 6 May, Israeli forces ordered around 100,000 Palestinians to evacuate the eastern portion of Rafah. Many were simply unable to flee. Children and elderly people are so starved that they can barely walk. They cannot just relocate to another area, to so-called safe zones. It's just not possible. And even for those who are able to leave, they've nowhere left to go. Yet again, Israel's use of evacuation orders and designation of humanitarian zones are purely performative. They endanger rather than protect civilian life. So-called humanitarian zones are not safe. The zones are policed by the same Israeli forces who have attacked Palestinians in their homes, in makeshift tents, in public markets, schools, and playgrounds, in agricultural greenhouses, while waiting for aid. By aid, dropping from the sky, while attempting to return to their homes, despite waving white flags, and above all else, while sheltering in and seeking treatment from hospitals. Rafah as a place of refuge or safety remains a cruel distortion for another reason, Your Excellencies. For months, Israel threatened to invade Rafah, leading the UN Secretary General to warn that an assault on Rafah would be a political calamity and a humanitarian nightmare, which was also, of course, highlighted by this court in its decision of 16 February. We are before this court urgently because Palestinians are now having to live out that nightmare. On 7 May, just 15 hours after the evacuation orders were issued, Israel commenced a severe and sustained military assault on Rafah, which is ongoing, and it has intensified in the intervening period until today, killing and injuring Palestinians and destroying their makeshift homes and the remaining infrastructure necessary to sustain life in Gaza, including all aid and medical infrastructure in its path. Israel deliberately attacked the very shelters to which it directed Palestinians to flee. So, Palestinian families in Gaza are left to make an impossible choice. Either they stay, trapped and likely killed alongside their loved ones in Rafah, or they head out into the few bits of remaining land in Gaza, now filling up with tents and shacks built of bits of wood and nylon and vulnerable to attacks. The overwhelming majority have no means to flee other than on foot. There is nothing humanitarian about these humanitarian zones. Then on 11 May, the Israeli military issued a new round of evacuation orders, affecting some 34 neighborhoods in eastern Rafah and North Gaza. UN agencies estimate in total that approximately 20% of Gaza's population have been displaced yet again in the past week alone. By 10 May, an estimated 110,000 people had fled Rafah. By yesterday, 15 May, this number had increased to around 600,000 according to the UN. And all the while, and now by these actions, Israel's genocide of Palestinians continues through military attacks and man-made starvation, and while mocking this court's provisional measures of protecting the rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. A critical part, Your Excellencies, of Israel's defiance of this court's orders comes in relation to aid and food itself. Israel has seized control of both the Rafah and the Kerem Shalom crossings, taking total control of all entry and exit of people and goods into Gaza as a whole, choking off the two main arteries for getting life-saving aid to Gaza's starving population. And in so doing, it has plunged Gaza into unprecedented levels of humanitarian need, even as compared with the catastrophic levels of the previous 7 months that led this court to conclude that famine was setting in back in March. The closure of the crossings means that Palestinians starving in a full-blown man-made famine are now further deprived of food, where Israel's attacks have systematically decimated food production systems throughout Gaza. It means that fuel cannot get in to run incubators and life-saving machinery in hospitals, water pumps and wells. It means that people, including the chronically sick and injured, cannot get out of Gaza, and vital aid cannot get into Gaza. And this poses an overwhelmingly grave threat, not only to the Palestinian people, but also to United Nations personnel and aid workers trying to bring some desperately needed relief. Despite Israel's announcements that it would open Kerem Shalom on 8 May, on 10 May, the UN reported that no supplies were passing through any crossings in southern Gaza. As of 15 May, the Rafah crossing remains closed, and there is a continued lack of safe and logistically viable access to the Kerem Shalom crossing. The crisis could not be more urgent. And that is so where Israel's assaults on Rafah and the closure of these critical crossings are aggravating the famine-like conditions across Gaza, where over 1 million people are predicted to face catastrophe, IPC Phase 5, food insecurity levels through July, which is just around the corner. Bakeries have been forced to shut down because they don't have fuel. Ongoing attacks in Rafah have rendered humanitarian warehouses inaccessible, and responders providing food aid will run out of food supplies within the coming days. In addition to killing and harming Palestinians, the Israeli assault on Rafah has deliberately inflicted on them conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical and biological destruction. This is starkly illustrated through Israel's destruction of Rafah's hospitals. Due to the ongoing hostilities in its vicinity and the military operation in Rafah, the Al-Najjar Hospital, the main medical facility in the entire Rafah Governorate and one of Gaza's largest remaining partially functioning hospitals, is no longer functional. It was a lifeline for 200 dialysis patients per day whom the World Health Organization previously warned would die if the hospital were to shut down. Fears for the Al Emirati Hospital are also particularly acute. This is one of the last partially functioning maternity hospitals in the whole of Gaza, which was until recently handling almost half of Gaza's daily total of 180 births. It has already been forced to stop admitting patients, and medics warn that without a doubt, every single one of the 45 babies in the neonatal intensive care unit and the special intensive care unit will die if the hospital is occupied. And then on 13 May, medical staff at the Kuwaiti hospital in Rafah received an evacuation order from Israeli forces. As one of the last remaining hospitals in Rafah, it had only around 16 beds available for the more than 1 million people sheltering in Rafah. And its closure will mean the complete collapse of what was the limping healthcare system in Rafah. Mr. President, allow me to conclude. Israel's ground incursion into Rafah has been described by the United Nations as one of the darkest mornings in this 7-month nightmare. With Rafah's destruction ongoing as South Africa speaks to this court today, the destruction of Gaza itself will be complete. The change in the situation in Gaza and the new facts in Rafah that I've described demand the provisional measures that Ms. Negrali will speak to. The necessity could not be starker. The magnitude and the gravity of the situation facing the Palestinian people in Gaza now exemplified in Rafah. South Africa has thus been motivated to come urgently to this court to prevent the destruction of the final Palestinian governorate of Gaza, with its homes, its hospitals, its schools, its libraries, its businesses, shelters, its mosques, to which Israel has not yet laid complete waste. And South Africa has come as quickly as possible to the court to ensure that the exhausted Palestinian men, women, and children who have sought refuge in Rafah are protected from a bloodbath. And it has sought urgent protective relief because of the now pressing need to ensure the survival of the Palestinian people in Gaza as a group and their protection from further harm, starvation, disease, and death by Israel's closure of the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings, fatally impacting the so desperately needed delivery of life-saving humanitarian aid, basic services, and medical assistance across Gaza. But Israel's genocidal acts in Rafah, Mr. President, and distinguished members of the court, cannot be understood without appreciating the overall genocidal context in which Israel's Rafah operation is embedded. My colleague, Dr. Hassim, will outline this along with the crippling effects of Rafah, now on harrowing display across the Gaza Strip as a whole. I thank you, Mr. President.
Professor Max du Plessis for his statement. I now give the word to Ms. Adila Hassim.